The GameCube was my first game console, and is still to this day my favorite game console of all time. And those of you in my audience may be rolling your eyes and saying, "You've already told us a million times in videos and in live streams how much you love the GameCube. We know already that the GameCube is your favorite console of all time." Well, one, too fucking bad. I love this console so much, and you're never gonna hear the end of it from me when it comes to how much I love it. Two, I figured there's some people bound to come across this video, get mad at the title because they assume I'm gonna bash the hell out of it because I hate the console. Or maybe there's some people out there looking up negative videos about the GameCube because maybe they really hate the console and they want to feel vindicated, but I'm sorry, this is not the video for you. And I'm also sorry for your garbage ass taste. It's just that while this console is great, it's definitely not perfect. No console is. And I want to take off the rose-colored glasses for a bit and talk about some of the things about this console or related to this console that annoy me. Let's begin. Two-disc games. You know, for these types of videos, people usually save the things that they hate the most for last, but I'm the opposite. I want to get the thing that I hate the most about the GameCube out of the way. The small discs definitely played a part in the GameCube not selling well. It hindered third-party support because a lot of devs didn't want to work with a console that had discs so fucking small that they couldn't fit their entire game on a single disc. There are definitely some developers that put up with it, of course, like Capcom, for example. I mean, look at this picture. Resident Evil 4 on GameCube came in 2 discs. You would think that Nintendo would learn its lesson after the N64, which used cartridges over discs, and many developers didn't want to go through the hassle of making their games work on a cartridge, so they just went over to PlayStation. And look, the PS2 was such a titan in the 6th generation that I think, even if the GameCube had normal-sized discs for games, it probably still would have stomped on the GameCube. But maybe at the very least, if the GameCube didn't use mini discs, we would have seen at least a little bit more third-party support for it, because it's a very capable console. It was even more powerful than the PS2, and I think it was only just a little behind the original Xbox in terms of specs. So it's not like hardware capability was holding the GameCube back, it was these small-ass discs that were. Nintendo finally made the jump to optical media, but still fucked it up. I know I deviated away from talking about just two-disc games, but this section is kind of a double rant because, well, the reason there were two-disc games were because the discs for the GameCube were so fucking tiny that certain games couldn't fit on a single disc. Every time I'm playing a two-disc game on the GameCube, and I'm getting close to the part of the game where the game stops, and then there's a screen that tells me to swap Game Disc 1 with Game Disc 2, I groan, because I know I gotta get up, get the game case out, open the game case, take out Disc 2, and then take out Disc 1 from the GameCube, and then insert Game Disc 2. It's even more annoying when I'm playing downstairs in the living room and I gotta go upstairs and get Disc 2. Ugh, yes, I know it's not that big of a hassle at all. Yes, I am just that fucking lazy. But hey, this would not be a problem if Nintendo didn't make the GameCube's discs so fucking tiny. The Game Boy Player Startup Disc. As you probably know, Nintendo made an accessory for the GameCube that allowed you to play nearly all of your Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and of course, Game Boy Advance games on the big screen. And I regard it as quite possibly the best console accessory of all time. This add-on expanded the GameCube's library by tens of thousands of games. And also, the accessory itself just screws on to the bottom of your GameCube, making it just about an inch taller and, well, making it an actual cube. So it complements the GameCube's design very well, and isn't a complete eyesore like, say, the add-ons for the Sega Genesis. And the player itself is pretty cheap. You can get it on eBay for around 40 to 50 bucks. I think I paid around 45 bucks for my Game Boy player. So far, I have nothing but praise for the Game Boy player. But that all ends now, because now I'm going to talk about the fucking disc it needs to work. For the longest time, the only way to get a Game Boy player to work was via a boot disc. The GameCube itself was unable to communicate with the Game Boy player. It needed a little help from a friend. Now, on its own, I don't really care that much that the Game Boy player needs a boot disc, but these discs are expensive as all hell. You're looking at around 180 bucks to over 200 bucks for just the boot disc alone. Why are these discs so expensive, you may ask? Well, that's because apparently back in the day, A lot of people lost these discs. You mean to tell me these tiny fucking discs were easy for kids to lose back in the day? Who would have fucking guessed? And I don't really blame people for losing the startup disc because, to be honest, and I hope I'm not the only person who thinks this, if you just glance at it for like a quick second, it doesn't even really look like a game disc. It looks more like a mini disc you'd put into a camera or something, not a disc for a video game console. And I know this technically isn't a game disc, it's just a disc that contains software that allows you to play your Game Boy games on your GameCube. You plop the disc into the GameCube, turn your GameCube on, and then immediately when the GameCube reads the disc and goes into Game Boy player mode, it immediately stops reading the disc, and the disc's job ends there. From then on, the Game Boy player itself takes over. That's what you're paying $100+ for. But I guess I shouldn't make fun of anyone who would pay for this disc because that's my Game Boy player disc you're looking at right now. I was able to snag this for a pretty decent price. It still wasn't cheap, but definitely better than most of the other prices you see on the internet. And I know this disc isn't really needed anymore these days because now there's homebrew software that gets the GameCube to start up the Game Boy player without the need of the disc. But meh, I'm a complete dumbass when it comes to modding consoles, so I'll just stick with the disc. I know a lot of people say that the homebrew software is superior to the software that's on the disc, but I don't fucking care. The D-pad and the C-stick. It may be blasphemous to talk shit about the GameCube controller, because it's regarded as one of the greatest video game controllers of all time. It is the Smash Bros. Community's go-to controller. Nintendo still sells these controllers. And hey, I like this controller too. I like the design, and it's comfortable to hold in my hands. But I think the D-pad and the C-stick are two blemishes that hold this controller back from being absolutely perfect. The D-pad on this controller is so fucking small and stiff, and that's especially a problem for me because I got fat sausage fingers. Like, I just finished Metroid Prime Echoes for like the third time the other day. Great fucking game, by the way. And let's say I wanted to switch to the Echo visor, but it would accidentally switch to the dark visor. Because I guess my thumb was just a little off and the game registered me as pressing right as opposed to pressing down on the D-pad. Because my thumb is big and the D-pad is so fucking small that it's easy to fuck up when it comes to which direction I'm pressing down on. And this is especially annoying in games like Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2 because some of the bosses in those games require you to switch visors in the middle of battle. And now the C-stick. I'll admit I don't dislike the C-stick as much as I dislike the D-pad, but you can thank the C-stick for the lack of FPS games on the GameCube. Having your character aim with this little fucking thing would definitely be awkward. When it comes to the C-stick, it's entirely down to preference. I don't really like the C-stick because it's just a little unintuitive for my big hands. I much prefer two regular analog sticks, but there's also people out there who like the C-stick, because maybe it's just easier to flick around than a regular-sized analog stick. So that's really where my distaste for the C-stick begins and ends. It's the D-pad that's the bane of my existence. The component cables. Did you not know there were component cables made for the GameCube? Well, I don't really blame you because it seems like Nintendo themselves forgot they were even selling component cables back when they were still on the market. To my understanding, back in the day, the only official way, at least, to get these cables were through Nintendo's website. They weren't in stores, Nintendo didn't advertise these at all, so not many people even knew that these existed. So since these things are rare, nowadays if you want to get your hands on them, you're likely going to pay about $250 for them. What are so special about these ports, you may ask? They took advantage of the GameCube's digital AV port. The digital AV port allowed better picture, and these component cables made the GameCube output to 480p, meaning with these component cables you would get much crisper picture out of your GameCube. And note, not all GameCubes have the digital AV out on the back. Later GameCube models only shipped with the analog AV out, because, as it turned out, a lot of people didn't use the digital AV out when the GameCube was still out on the market. Gee, I wonder why, Nintendo. It couldn't have been because you buried these component cables on your website, and didn't even bother to sell them in stores. But, anyway, this doesn't really matter to me because I play GameCube on an HD television. And yes, I'm using the composite cables that came with it. I just use a cheap converter to be able to play my GameCube on the TV in the living room, and thankfully the TV in my room actually does have ports for composite cables. But luckily my GameCube has a digital AV port, so I eventually plan on getting one of those HDMI solutions to get much better picture out of my GameCube. So this is really only a problem for people who still play GameCubes on CRTs. The reason I'm including this in the list of things that I hate about the GameCube is because this just highlights Nintendo's sheer and utter incompetence. The ridiculous prices for some of the games. We're currently going through what some call a GameCube renaissance, meaning that now more than ever, people are going out and buying GameCube games. So naturally, since GameCube games are in higher demand, the prices are going to be hacked up, and some of these prices are just fucking outrageous. Look at this screenshot, for example. Chibi Robo is a game that I've been interested in playing for a long time now, and would love to add to my collection. But there is no fucking way I am paying $280 fucking dollars for this game. And you may be saying, well, the reason why this specific copy of Chibi Robo is selling for $280 is because the seller says it is in mint condition. And yes, I know, the condition of a product factors into the price of it on eBay, but even non-mint conditions of this game don't go for that much fucking better. For just a working disc alone, you're paying around $180 to $200 for this game. And a lot of really great GameCube games are suffering from this right now. Paper Mario goes for over $100, even for just the disc. There's a Fire Emblem game that goes around like for 400 fucking bucks. Thank God I don't give a shit about Fire Emblem. I played The Houses or Three Houses, whatever the fuck it was called, a few years ago. Didn't really get into it, so I have no interest whatsoever in paying 400 bucks for a GameCube Fire Emblem game. But I feel really bad for the Fire Emblem fans who do want to play that game on official hardware, but can't because they don't want to shell out an absurd amount of money for like a 20-year-old game. And you may be screaming, emulation! Who gives a fuck about owning these games physically in the year 2022? I do. I have a GameCube, as you all know, and I like collecting for it, and part of the fun of these games for me is owning them physically. I just love having a collection of games that I can look at and hold. Hell, even most of the games that I play on my PS5 are games that I own physically. I just don't get the same satisfaction from emulation. I love playing on the real deal. You may think it's stupid, and more power to ya. If you love playing on emulators, that's fine. It's probably even the morally right thing to do when it comes to a company as awful and draconian as Nintendo. But I'm different. There's just something special about owning these games physically and playing them on real hardware. That's just how I am. And I have to throw some shade at Nintendo for this because it's not like they make any effort whatsoever to preserve these games. Look at Super Mario Sunshine. Before the 3D All-Stars collection came out, that game was around $90. After the 3D All-Stars collection, if you want the GameCube version, it's like, what, 40 or 50 bucks now? If Nintendo made a lot of the GameCube's library readily available on the Switch, a lot of these games would probably go down in price. Because most people aren't going to play these games via buying them secondhand off eBay and playing them on a console that discontinued 15 years ago. No, because if they have a Switch and are already subscribed to the awful expansion pack for the already awful online service the Switch has, because that's likely where Nintendo would put GameCube games, they're gonna play through that. Thus, demand for physical copies of GameCube games would go down, and thus the prices for said physical GameCube games would go down. I'm not gonna say this would entirely fix the price problem, and things will go back to how they were in the late 2000s, early 2010s, when you could buy GameCube games for dirt fucking cheap. I'm sure the rarer games would still be on the more pricey side, but I'm sure this would at least ameliorate the problem. I would love for this to happen someday, but for some reason Nintendo likes to act like this console never even existed. The Wii U gets more attention from Nintendo than the GameCube does. Like half of the best games on the Switch were originally released on the Wii U. By the way, I don't tolerate any Wii U slander. That console was unironically great, and you can't persuade me otherwise. So those were my gripes with the GameCube, at least the ones that jumped to my mind right away. I don't really have that many gripes with it because, again, it's my favorite console of all time and I love it so much. But at least after this video, you can claim that I'm a complete fanboy for the console. Anyway, maybe someday I'll make a video similar to this, but for the PS5, because I definitely have my share of gripes with that console as well. We'll see if I ever feel like making it, because I tend to make promises on this channel that I never fulfill. Sorry. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Bye bye.